were to convert into Catholicism, I would always have this core fear. If I could change anything in all of Christianity, it would be this: undefendable, sketchy, and the term idolatry. There could be a host of meanings. And I hope if you are Catholic, you realize how much your theology hurts people. Hey guys, it's Lizzie. So this is what I hate about Catholicism, my past self. We're going to read a video script from 2017 that never made it into a full-length video. But I'm going to go through this video script and react to it, and I actually think this will be very educational. If you are currently Protestant, I think you will totally relate to how I used to feel, and if you're someone who grew up their entire life as a Catholic, this will be illuminating and help you understand the perspective of many American Protestants who grow up in this culture of believing all these false things about Catholicism. If I were to convert into Catholicism, I would always have this core fear. This makes me incredibly sad. If I could change anything in all of Christianity, it would be this. Wow, this is gonna be huge. When you walk into a Catholic church, you immediately see Jesus on the cross, which I understand. He died for us. That's a significant part of Christian doctrine. But he resurrected from the dead, and it is beautiful and the core of our faith. Symbols are powerful, and I think that is intentional, and it affects you in a certain way if you continually experience worship like that. So I'm saying that it's intentional that the Catholic leadership wants all of the Catholics to have this negativity and to not appreciate the miracle of Easter and the resurrection. I have cried reading over the crucifixion passages, and I don't think if Jesus came back, he would want this intense focus on him being tortured. He did that for us, and then right after he says, "It is over." And that established the new covenant. And at this point, I'd only attended Mass one time at Our Lady of Malibu in Malibu, California with some of my college friends. And that crucifix must have been a bad crucifix. It left quite the imprint on my mind. And emotionally, during a service, and then I put in parentheses, and maybe this is just me, I cannot even focus fully on Christ, on God, because I see someone being crucified. So I wrote this video script in February of 2017. And in October of 2016, I'd uploaded a video, what I love and hate about Catholicism, but I didn't really share that in depth what I hated. It was more like I was making a series, what I love and hate about Orthodox, Catholicism, Pentecostal, Mormonism. I was kind of doing a series of going through different churches, and so I didn't want to be that offensive online. So I didn't go full force and share all of my negativity in the what I love and hate video. So this was going to be like the what I actually really hate video. That's what this video script is. I am highly emotionally receptive, intense, and it terrifies me. I hate having to look at that. I was starting to understand Catholicism more, but then there was this part of me that was really pushing back and hating it so much. I hate having to look at that. And I'm laughing when I'm reading that because I'm so used to going to Mass now and seeing crucifixes. And I mean, I have a crucifix on my wall. I have several in this room. But at the time, because I'm so emotionally sensitive, and I've made videos about this, it's called HSP, highly sensitive persons. Therapists have kind of diagnosed me with being more emotionally sensitive, and also with having bipolar disorder, being so emotionally intense. When I see violence, I'm so affected by it. And so it was shocking and revolting walking into a Catholic church and seeing Jesus hanging in pain, violently dying on the cross. I just hated it and I couldn't deal with it. And I even thought that I would never be able to be Catholic because of the crucifix. And God actually blessed me immensely, because when I started going to Mass in Florida, they had a resurrected Jesus instead of a crucifix, where he was on a cross, but it was not violent. It was just resurrected Jesus. And then the parish I go to currently, it has a mural of Jesus, and it's also a resurrected type Jesus, like he's on the cross, but it's not violent. Something I would say to my younger self is that the crucifixion implies the resurrection. So when we look into a crucifix, we're also thinking about the resurrection. And I actually was having a conversation with my boyfriend's brother, and he said it in the most perfect way. We were looking at the crucifixes in Trevor's apartment, and he's not Catholic or religious, but he said something akin to, if I died in this horrific way, sacrificing for the people I love, I would want them to remember me and to remember how I died. So I think I was wrong to think that Jesus wouldn't want us to remember this act of pure love. And that's what it is when I see a crucifix. I don't see pain, I see love. And then also to be drawn towards picking up our cross and following Jesus and living sacrificially and dying to self through how we live. And also, I would ask my former self, why do you have a picture of a cross without Jesus on it? An empty cross is powerless. It does not save us. The anti-pope. So this is something I ruminated on for so long. I remember, so this video script was written in February, and I remember specifically talking to my Catholic friend, and this is in May when I was visiting California again, because I was living in Florida at the time, and I remember asking him, the anti-pope disproves the pope. That means there's not a clear succession. That disproves the entire papacy. I don't know why. I think because in history class growing up, like in AP European history, my teacher was an ex-Catholic and super hated Catholicism, and the way he taught the class was very against Catholicism. And so I think the way he taught this, he was kind of mocking the concept and made it seem like there were two popes at the same time. But I'm actually reading a book on the popes right now, and there were so many anti-popes from the early church. It isn't a new modern thing that happened around the time of the Reformation. And it's so obvious. There's the pope, the line of succession of popes, and then there's other people trying to steal power who are the fake popes. It's so simple. When we learn this in history class in high school, people who are not Christian, they laugh. It seems undefendable, sketchy. And like I said, I wouldn't care. I think humans in general have flawed leadership structures. But like I've said with all of these, you are claiming to be the true church. That grammar structure, I was manic at the time. But I just made a video talking about early evidence in the Bible and in the early church for the Pope, for why Peter was the first Pope. So I will definitely link that below if you're like me and you were doubting the validity of the Pope in the early church. And in that video, I talk about bishops as well and priests that are all intertwined with it. And I have an entire video talking about papal infallibility and what we mean by that. Because at this time as well, I thought that the Pope, that Catholics thought the Pope was perfect and that every word the Pope spoke came directly from God, when in reality, it's like once every couple centuries when the Pope makes a papal infallibility statement. It's very rare, and there are all these things that have to be said and written to show that it's a papal infallibility statement. But it's not like Pope is infallible all the time, and I totally thought that at the time. In Hebrews, it talks all about how Jesus is the high priest. While on earth, Jesus said he would tear apart the curtain. Do you guys realize the significance of that? The Holy of Holies, only the priest could go in there, and once a year. Now, Jesus is the priest, and we have full access to God without another human being. This is another thing where it's just like, why? I'm not kidding, this is in all caps, like WHHAYYY question mark. It's just so random. It is almost like someone is like, let's choose random things and just change them. You are right, this is very in line with Judaism, which is the problem. Jesus came and he changed core aspects of Judaism. So I think that's really common as a Protestant to think that Jesus came and changed the whole order because it talks about the priesthood of all believers in the New Testament, which I've heard in a homily before. The priest is like, yes, we are all priests in the priesthood of believers. A priest said that. So because of that, and the fact that it was in Judaism was actually a negative thing. And I remember people commenting on my YouTube videos at the time and being like, Catholicism is so similar to Judaism. Baptizing infants, circumcising infants, the whole idea of the Old Testament monarchy, of the mother of the king being Queen Mother, and the keys of the kingdom. I made a video recently talking about Purgatory. Judaism also believes in a middle state, and they pray for the dead. I mean, I could go on and on. There are so many similarities between Judaism at the time and today and Catholicism, and so people were giving me these arguments and being like, isn't that an amazing thing? They're so similar, that must mean Catholicism is right. And at the time, I was like, absolutely not. I don't want to be similar to Judaism. Jesus changed everything. This is the new covenant. And so the fact that there were priests in Catholicism, I saw that as a huge negative and not anything that made it seem to be true. But at this time, I was reading a church history book that talked about how there were bishops and priests in the 2nd and 1st centuries. And so it was kind of stretching my reality. A verse I always quote though is when Jesus says, not a word, not an iota will be changed from the old law. And then another thing on my list was musical worship. Because my church growing up had a cappella worship with no instruments. And so we would say that in the New Testament, they were singing without instruments. Like you can't point to a place in the Bible. Well, in the New Testament, in the Old Testament, David was worshiping God with a harp and they were dancing during worship. But in the New Testament, they don't have instruments. The early church doesn't have instruments. So if you go by the Bible, you can't have instruments at church. That was my mindset. So this is why I loved the Orthodox Church, because an Orthodox church that I was going to several times a week at the time when I wrote this video script, that Orthodox church was a cappella. They had a choir but no instruments, and I loved it so much. It felt like the early church, the Orthodox church did. Veneration of the saints. And now I quote something that my dad has told me. Google the definition of veneration. It is worship. And actually, if you go on Google right now, let me know what it says, comment in the video description, but it actually is different than worship. But my dad at the time, because my parents actually did missionary work in Russia, and so the Orthodox Church was huge there. And he said that if you looked up in a dictionary the definition of veneration, it's the same as worship. And this was like a huge thing that my dad was caught up on and that I was as well. There are a lot of different types of worship, and the term idolatry, there could be a host of meanings. So we're not going to go through everything on the list, but I want to end with the birth control teaching, which I recently uploaded a video talking about natural family planning. I interviewed a natural family planning instructor, and so I'm going to link that video below because I think that's really important for what we're about to read. But because I have bipolar disorder and would have to go off my bipolar meds if I got pregnant, the no birth control teaching horrified me. And it was like the last teaching I accepted. Like, I accepted that Mary was sinless before I accepted no birth control. It makes me feel very overpowered. This made sense in the Middle Ages, not anymore. I do not want to accidentally get pregnant. And I know, even on really good birth control, it fails. And just to give an example of myself, I cried so hard writing this. Sorry, I'm laughing at my previous self, but I was so manic at the time. And so reading this now, it just doesn't seem clear, and it's like a ton of run-on sentences. And like I said, I'm sure that when I made this into a video, I would have edited it down. Like at the time when I was making videos, I would have like an hour and a half of footage and then have to like rearrange all the footage because the way I was talking was not clear and wasn't in like a succession of clear reasoning. I cried so hard writing this part of the video script, and I hope if you are Catholic, you realize how much your theology hurts people. It hurts me so much just knowing that people ascribe to this. This specifically. I have, in all caps, a mental illness. I have bipolar disorder, and I have to take medicine for it. And if I'm on it when I'm pregnant, I will give a birth defect to the fetus, destroy it. They don't even know. And it is so dangerous too. There's a huge suicidal rate. I've been suicidal in my depression, and I am not going to have my fetus be a trial to see how the medicine affects it if they're sort of sure it's okay. So in general, this is my number one fear for the future, getting pregnant. I obviously don't think about it. I did when I was first diagnosed, but it is relevant here. And I'm not saying I don't want kids. It will just be awful. But I do when I'm scared. I didn't spell scared right. Like, this is such manic writing right now. When I am not on my medicine, I go into severe depression or mania. I'm glad I added that caveat, or mania, because I was very manic at the time when I was converting into Catholicism. A lot of times it is immediate, like within weeks, crash into depression. Oh, so I have to be forever abstinent, which I would for sure choose over being with some guy who is chill with emotionally scarring people. So I thought any Catholic guy against birth control was chill with emotionally scarring me. Which, okay, I shouldn't be laughing at this because I'm just at a point now where I've done a lot of research in natural family planning. The sympto-thermal method of natural family planning has a 99.7% success rate. It's more effective than forms of birth control. And so in the future, I'm not worried about postponing a pregnancy if I'm in a really bad depression episode or if I'm really manic and I need to stay on my meds. Like, I'm not worried at all. But I hadn't done any research in a natural family planning, and I had no idea how effective it can be in monitoring your fertility signs and being able to postpone pregnancy. I obviously wanted to be Orthodox at the time, but even like months and months later, I had the perspective that if I was going to become Catholic, I was going to lie at my confirmation and actually use birth control. And I even thought that I would just never get married rather than be with a guy who was against birth control and against contraception, because I just thought that was so emotionally violating that someone would want to push me off my medicine against my will. But now with natural family planning and the sympto-thermal method, I'm so confident that once I get married, I can postpone pregnancy. If I had to be married to a guy who thinks this, I'd be terminally single. Which is so funny because I'm dating a guy now who's against birth control. At the time, oh my gosh, I never would have imagined that I could be in a happy relationship and feel safe with someone who would want to have sex with me without using contraception or birth control. And it's so crazy because reading everything that I wrote here, even if I did use contraception and birth control in the future, I would have to be off my medicine, and I was willing to have children and deal with that. But I just thought that natural family planning had like a 5% success rate or something. I didn't know how scientific it was. And now that I know how scientific it was, I'm not scared going into a no contraception and no birth control situation. So I highly recommend you check out the video I made with the natural family planning instructor. We went so in depth into how it works and the theology of it. So if I'd watched that video in 2017, I wouldn't have gone on this manic rampage about how harmful the theology is. I love you guys so much. Thank you for listening to my manic writing with me. It's so interesting thinking back to that time of being off meds and everything crazy that I did and wrote and thought. And I'm glad that within that mental illness time, God was able to use it for good and He redeemed it. I was being so impulsive and I got addicted to reading and researching into the early church and understanding it more, and I wouldn't have been able to trust so much and to make such a huge leap theologically if I wasn't manic. And I answered in a Q&A video becoming Catholic while I was manic, so I'll link that below if you're interested as well. But I love you guys so much, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!